Hello, I'm Vincent.
And I'm Andrew.
And we both work at Sander Fair and we're always handling great stamps. And Andy challenged me. He said he was going to bring some Commonwealth classics to the party. So we've both rustled around our offices and come up with some interesting things. And I've already managed to put mine under the camera, so I get to talk first. And we're all familiar with the Mauritius post office classic from 1847. No, we don't have one. Don't get excited. These are world rarities. But we've got a picture of one under on the screen now, and that is, you will see, has the word post office on the left, which was commonly accepted to be a mistake because most stamps have postage written on them. But the history of these classics is interesting. There's a whole series of them in the early days of Mauritius, but the first post office Mauritius classic was the first stamp of the British Empire, and they're doing their best, bless them, in lonely old Mauritius to copy the great stamps of the home country of Great Britain. And as you can see, they fell short a little. They didn't have the engine turning technology or the world's greatest engravers on the island. In fact, the chap who engraved the first stamp of Mauritius was called Barnard, and he was a stowaway who'd landed on Mauritius many years before, and he engraved a plate for a penny and a tuppenny, as history shows, and then he re-engraved them, and they were issued for 13 years and slowly wore out, and the catalogues list them in various stages of wear and tear, from earliest to very worn. And so under the camera I've got some examples of the issues that followed that first 1847 post office, and you can see here are two shades of essentially the same level of wear and tear, which is called the intermediate level, and they're catalogued a great deal of money. They're very difficult to get, where you can see so much of the engraving and the postmarks are not obliterating them. And these over here, this pair, are worn impressions, and you can see they are slightly more worn. You can see less of the lines. There's more gaps between the lines. Now, in the Stanley Gibbons catalogue, there's an awful lot of commentary about how to tell these apart, and I'm afraid nobody who's a dealer or an auctioneer in this area uses those descriptions to help them. What they use is generally one of the most important auction catalogues of any collection ever produced. In 1993, the Canai collection of Mauritius classics was auctioned, and that collector had identified every position of the plates of 12 on from very early impressions to the worn out impressions. And those of us who have a copy of this catalogue tend to refer to this. It's a very useful guide because the different positions show different levels of apparent wear. So it's not always helpful just to go off a description in a catalogue. As the plates finally wore out, we ended up with this remarkable stamp, which was engraved by a chap called Laprio, who I think he was in charge of the prisons on the island, did a bit of engraving, and Her Majesty looks like she's in a wind tunnel, and the stamp was described as locally as a Mozambique tuppenny for some strange reason, and also a libel label, because it was said that this was the greatest libel ever done to our young queen, as of that date because it looks so dreadful. A little later on, we had issues produced in a different method. I think it was in lithography by a chap called Dardin, and he did a penny and a twopenny, really made an effort to copy the British style of penny and twopenny, and not a bad attempt. You've got to remember just how far away from the state-of-the-art technology Mauritius was at the time. But these stamps, particularly these two, do come along forged. You should only buy them from reputable, knowledgeable sources. Anyway, I think that's enough about those. Andy's going to try and convince you that the stamps he's brought along are much more interesting. So we'll leave the Mauritius classics alone for a while.
Well, thank you, Vince. That was a great little selection of classic Mauritius there. I think I can top that, though. I've gone for the timeless Cape of Good Hope triangulars. Firstly, because of the unusual shape, and of course the romance of the story of Stanley Gibbons getting their great hoard of stamps that were brought into their shop in Plymouth by a couple of sailors in a kit bag. So they've always become very iconic. I've got a nice little selection here under the camera. Now, first of all, these stamps were printed in 1853 by Perkins, Bacon and Co. in London, and later on the plates were reused by Delarue in 1863, and they've been reprinted and so forth over the years. Now, you can tell the difference in the plates the printers by the shades, but there's also other key sources you can go on, basically the colours of the papers and the impression and the colours of the actual inks. Now, here we have, first of all, I'm going to turn some of these over. These are, you'll see straight away, a blued paper and a not so blued paper. These are the ones that Gibbons list. The slightly blued papers often show this ivory type head, very similar to what you get on the British line engraved stamps. You can see how distinct the blued papers are when we turn this one over to a white paper. You get various different degrees of bluing on them. So this is just a nice selection representing the issues. Now this, sorry, there we go. This sixpence here is unusual with this cancellation. It's one of the first roller cancels that was available throughout the whole empire, and I think from memory it was from Grahamstown. And there's very few known with this strike. It's got a series of bars, and that one's been placed vertically there. The normal cancellations are these triangular type devices here. Now, I've shown this one here, this penny, because it's possibly one of the finest examples I've ever seen. What's nice about it, it leaves almost all of the portrait of hope there totally clear of the cancellation. The colour's superb, and it's got this beautiful, very light cancellation across the corner there. It's always desirable to get them in pairs as well. People never know how to display them. You can have them that way up or that way up, of course, but I prefer it there, so you can see the full design above and below the Queen there. So that's my selection.
But what about the difference between the really blued and the slightly blued? Because they make a distinction in the collections, don't they?
Well, that was the first one I showed there. That's the deeply blued.
Okay. What about the one to the left of it? Is that
that's a deeply blued as well.
All right, cool.
So it's an overall deep bluing, whereas the slightly blued is quite mottled.
Well, and has that come through from the stamp at the front, or is that natural, the bluing of the paper from the very first?
No, it is bluing, but it is what they call slightly blued as opposed to the deep even bluing.
And those two on the top are deep,
yes,
are they?
Yes.
Yeah, that's nice.
But you get, as I say, you get much more of this ivory head. There is a little bit of it there, more of a ghost impression, but you get the full ivory shape of hope there on the slightly blued papers there.
Right. Yeah, you see that throughout the empire on those early issues, because they were using potash of Prussian. Well, no, the other way around. Appreciator potash. Is that a tongue twister?
I think it is, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You get them on the salon, the sixpence.
That's it.
Purple,
And the
brown
early,
purple stamp.
early Barbados stamps
Yes,
as well.
yes,
Yeah.
blue papers again. Yeah.
And then I can't remember what year it
Trinidad,
was.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They figured out how to wash the not to use that process, and
Yeah.
then all the papers
Yeah.
were white after that.
That's it.
So that's,
Yeah, it tends to be the early 1850s. So yeah, they're great stamps, and I encourage anybody to collect the the iconic British Empire stamps.
I feel strange just sitting this way around.
I know.
It's not
Yes.
right.
I don't know if anybody noticed that we'd swapped seats.
Yeah, no.
Of course.
Yeah. I found an interesting little snippet about the Cape Triangulars that apparently nobody was quite sure why they did them in a triangular fashion. We've got to remember, especially thinking about Mauritius, very few people really had a fixed idea in their mind what stamps should look like
Yes.
that early on.
Yeah.
And so you have strange things like the Mauritius classics. And there was a note found from the Cape that suggested that they try triangular designs so as not to cause confusion with the stamps of Great Britain. Little did they know how many square and oblong stamps would follow, but they thought that was a nice wheeze to avoid confusion. So, that's good.
Yeah.
I think we brought some. Let us know what you think. I think it was pretty much a draw, but if you need to know any more, we'll stick it in a following video. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.